Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. Welcome back to the Assembly Inclusion podcast. We're joined today by Jerred Mace, the CEO of OneCourt. Jerred, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Katie, for having me. I'm super excited to be here and share a little bit more about our work.
So I'm really excited because I was looking for a sports-related episode. We've done some adaptive sports work on this show, but this is more live professional sports, so I'm really excited. But right when I went onto the OneCourt website, the very first thing that struck me was the line that read, bringing live sports to fans with blindness or low vision. So I think for our listeners who may not be as familiar, would you be able to talk about some of the current challenges that blind and low vision sports fans might face when they're trying to watch and engage in live events?
That's a great question. What we hear from the community are a couple of things. There's a few challenges relating to latency of broadcasts as well as the fidelity of the description. So the latency point is critical in stadiums. So fans are going to games. They're often bringing radios, bringing friends and family who are offering additional description on top of that. But radio is really the main way people are engaging with the game. And the problem there is latency. It's often 10, 20, even 30 seconds behind the action. So you can imagine in a stadium of 70,000, even being a few seconds behind everyone else is really frustrating. People are left waiting for additional cues as to what actually happened, whereas a lot of people around them are cheering or responding to that action. So that's a huge pain point. I would say the other revolves around an inherent limitation of description to offer context on the spatial details. So it's really hard to describe the position of a tennis ball, for example, because it changes so rapidly. By the time you describe it, the point may already be over. So those are a couple of the main pain points that we see and hear about in the community. Latency and the spatial detail just isn't as convincing.
I could see that being really frustrating. I'm heavily invested in hockey. I'm just imagining how difficult it would be to explain spatially passing the puck between all these players and who's taking the puck from somebody else. It has to be very frustrating. I could definitely understand that.
And some sports are better than others. We've seen an interesting correlation between pace and accessibility. So the faster the sport, often the less accessible it is. When you bring up hockey, that is a perfect example. It's extremely difficult to understand hockey through audio alone. Similar things with tennis and basketball. There's just a lot of change in direction and movement, and it's hard to get all of that information. On the opposite side, something like baseball is way more accessible. And there's a few reasons to that. Baseball is an interesting case because the players are almost statically tied to a position on the field. The third baseman is almost always at third base. And that's really helpful for description. People can build that mental model very easily as to, okay, that it was caught at third base. Well, I know where third base is, and third baseman is usually there. Different games have different, I would say, barriers to entry, but pace is a big one.
Baseball was the first thing I thought of when I thought about something that might be easier to describe. Baseball always comes to mind. The pacing is a little bit different than other sports, so definitely could see that being a little more helpful than others. But I wanted to ask specifically, aside from just the challenges that you've heard about people experiencing when trying to engage in live sports, what was your actual motivation or what inspired you for starting OneCourt?
The initial inspiration, I saw a video actually on YouTube. It was a video of a blind person at a soccer match. And it was actually, I believe, a deaf-blind person. And they were with an interpreter who watched the game below and at the same time moved his hands across a game board with a tactile graphic to represent the action on the field. And that really caught my attention. It was so clear to me that this was an intuitive and meaningful entry point to live sports, one that I had never considered before. And I think that was the inspiration for starting OneCourt was, well, this experience is clearly meaningful. Let's try to bring it to as many people as possible. So that's maybe the initial inspiration. I would say my motivations are both personal and professional. My experience is low vision as a child. Prior to a corrective surgery, I have experienced what it was like to miss out because of my vision, certain activities that I was not able to participate in, sports being many of those experiences. I remember very distinctly, like putting on my football helmet and having my glasses slip down my face. And it was very difficult to play the game. So that was more on the participation side. Along with my father's experience with visual disability, I think I've been around this space without even really internalizing that until recently. And that has primed my heart for this work and just pushed me to think about it. And then professionally, as a designer, I studied industrial design at the University of Washington. I'd say that's where I really gained a more user-centric model of the world through physical product, right? Thinking about how we can design physical objects and spaces that consider the people first, not just profit or aesthetic, but really thinking about people as the forefront and foundation for that work. So yeah, a couple motivations and also a key moment of inspiration.
And I appreciate the intersection between each of those components, having that experience of seeing the person at the soccer game and then your own experiences and then your experiences in higher ed kind of interacting all together. It's clear how all these different ideas came together to form this company or this solution. So can you talk about how OneCourt's technology is revolutionizing the way fans can experience live sports?
It really starts with the data. So, a lot of people ask us, why was this not done already? This is such an intuitive thing. Why was it not done 5-10 years ago? And a lot of that has to do with this emerging data and infrastructure that is happening at the professional level in sports. So I think people who use the visual broadcast can appreciate this, whether it's Hawkeye through professional tennis or next gen stats through the NFL. But there are these really cool and high fidelity data solutions. They're tracking everything. They know where the ball is. They know how it's accelerating, where it's moving. And that just multiplies covering the players and just everything happening on the field. So it's incredible to see the fidelity of this data. And we are basically exploring an application of that data, right? It's how can this data be used to improve people's experience in their lives, not just analytics on the back end. And of course, the sports teams and leagues and others are exploring similar applications and alternative broadcasts. But we're really excited to be, I would say, transforming that data and making it perceivable in a totally new way.
And it's a really interesting application of that data. Like you said, it's, I'm assuming they're doing it more for an analytics perspective, but the fact that you could take that information and use it to make something more accessible is really powerful. What does it look like from the user side? So like if somebody wanted to use like the handheld device to follow along with a live sporting event, how would that look? How would that go?
Basically, our team is trying to make live sports more accessible through this laptop-sized device. So basically, it's a device that you put on your lap or on a tabletop, and you put both hands on the surface. And on the surface, there's a tactile graphic of whatever sport or game you're watching. And of course, that has details like we can take American football as the example. The end zones are textured in a different way. And there's markings for every 10 yards. And the center line is dotted, for example, along with Braille indicators to communicate these different aspects of the graphic and help people become accustomed to the graphic. I think a lot of sighted folks take for granted just even the orientation to a sports field. Some folks have never seen a football field, and there's an education part of this. Like, how do we educate and show people what these sport courts and fields look like? So that's part of it. There's this tactile graphic on the surface, And what the user experiences is vibration moving underneath relative to that surface. And of course, that's driven by the data. So you can imagine watching a football game as the quarterback takes the snap, you're feeling vibration move underneath that interface, and it corresponds to the location of the ball. And the quarterback may throw it downfield, and you feel that vibration move rapidly in sync with the data, maybe up towards the sideline, for example.
I was watching a video of somebody using it. I have to be honest. I can just imagine somebody sitting in a game or even sitting in like a sports bar and hanging out with their friends and just being able to follow along and feel every part of the play. It was so cool to me to see how that worked.
It's hard to describe. I think we always talk about it in haptics, but haptics are much better felt than you just observed from a distance or through audio. I mean, they're much better felt. So I encourage everyone, if they get a chance to try our device at a convention or here in Seattle, definitely let us know. We'll try to make that connection.
So what has been some of the feedback from the people who have tried out the devices and the technology that you've produced? How are you using that feedback to make improvements to OneCourt's technology?
I would say feedback and co-design are the most critical aspects to product development here at OneCourt. It's absolutely critical that we center people in this design process and make sure that we're as close to the problem as possible and that we understand what people want out of this experience, because ultimately it's only useful if it's doing things that people want and it's showing things that people want. So I think a big part of that is information hierarchy. And we're seeing this trend in sports, the personalization of broadcasts. And we're really excited, I think, to be a part of that trend and see how can people negotiate and determine their own experiences in sports. And there's also, I would say, some technical limitations there. So for example, on our device, we needed to determine, okay, what can we show and what is maybe out of scope for right now, given the fidelity of our technology. So discussing with users and people in the community, what is it that you want to see on the field that you're not getting from that radio broadcast? And I want to be clear too, this technology is not meant to replace an audio broadcast. It's really meant to, I would say, add to the current solution and create a much more holistic environment whereby people can gain different information from different sources. We're never going to be able to compete with a radio broadcaster's ability to convey the emotion of the game, right? That's not our objective. Our objective is to fill the spatial gap. So a lot of people tell us, I don't know where the ball is. And that has become, I would say, a central focus for us, is identifying what are the most important things. For many, it's the ball. But there are other spatial details that become important from game to game. It may be important where the players are in many cases, but we have to take a proactive approach in just determining how many things we can show, because we can't show everything, right? I would say it varies. So in football, there's so much congestion, there's so much action happening on the field at one time that we're limited in what we can show at the same time. But for other sports like baseball, for example, we can show different elements at the same time. Like on the right side of the device, you can feel the strike zone, where that last pitch was relative to the batter. But on the left, you can feel where the hit was as it's streaking down the first baseline or something. So I would say the user feedback has been critical in defining the information hierarchy. And also, I would say the integration of both audio and haptics. I think in the beginning, we had it wrong. Like we thought, oh, this experience, this haptic experience is going to be so immersive that you won't need these other sensory inputs. But, user feedback cleared that up very quickly. And it was amazing to see that the integration of both audio and haptics, having both touch and sound to communicate the game, was extremely holistic and immersive. And it ended up reducing the learning curve practically to nothing. I think before, if you're just with audio or you're just with haptics, the learning curve is quite high. But with both, it's extremely intuitive because you may be hearing pass on the audio side while you're feeling the pass on the tactile side. That's the more critical advancement driven by the community to date.
I think that's great that you were able to see that with the feedback from the people who participated in trying it out. It's good to have that fully multi-sensory, I guess, experience with the audio plus being able to feel, because I could see how it has to be challenging to have all the vibrations going at once, especially in a game like football where there is so much going on. So I think that makes a lot of sense that the feedback seemed to be leading in that direction, because I could definitely see how that would be challenging.
I would say there's an added challenge in the live environment. As we discussed earlier, the audio is often delayed. It's maybe a suboptimal condition for that unification of both audio and haptics. One of the creative things we did to get around that, and this was again driven by user design, was the data we use to create the haptics, we might also be able to create audio feedback from. And we did that. We call it audio bytes, but it's basically a shorthand description of the game that's data generated. And it doesn't succumb to the prior limitations of the radio broadcast. So there's no delay in this audio. Again, it's not the radio broadcast. It doesn't have the emotion, at least not right now. Of course, with AI, you can imagine that feature being extrapolated further. There is some really cool work in this area, but we're really excited about how this data can be used to create a more holistic experience, even in the live stadium where that previously has not been as feasible. We're also seeing efforts to push teams and leagues to have more live broadcasts accessible within the stadium. So I would say there's a lot of people who are excited and really motivated to solve these problems.
It's great that all these professional teams are starting to have that push toward accessibility. And leading into that, I had read, and correct me if I'm wrong, I had read that there was a plan to pilot or test out OneCourt within the professional football setting.
Yeah, so we have a few sort of proof of concept and pilot examples in the past and also upcoming. I believe on New Year's Eve, actually, we did our proof of concept test with the Kansas City Chiefs in coordination with T-Mobile. And that was our first live in-stadium test where we went in, we tested this technology end to end. We're getting the data live. We're in the stadium. We're experiencing the game. It was an incredible experience. And I think one of the funny things about that was, we thought so much about the device and is the device going to be able to perform? And one of the interesting insights that came out of this proof of concept was it's not just important how the device performs in these live environments, but there's also impacts on the individual, the user of this device. And being in Kansas City on New Year's Eve, it was extremely cold. And while the device survived, we found it extremely difficult to sort of battle those conditions. So really interesting insights from that test, but it was cool and very clear that the device was able to perform and support that live in-stadium experience. But of course, it varies from league to league. These different sports giants have different data collection methods. The data does not look all the same. So we do have to make adjustments. But we're really excited about an upcoming pilot with the Portland Trail Blazers. So we'll be supporting the last 3 games of their season down at Moda Center in Portland, Oregon. We're very excited because this will be not just a single game. It's not just a proof of concept. It's a real pilot. And there will be front-facing, users in the stadiums trying these devices for the length of the entire game. So we're very excited for that. And hopefully it just leads to more opportunities where we can support these in-stadium accommodations.
Oh, that's really exciting about the upcoming pilot, as well as the trial from the beginning of the year, although I'm sure that had to be challenging in the cold.
Yeah.
It's great that the device did well, though, because you never know how devices are going to fare in the colder climates. It's interesting how much things have, adapted and gotten more developed as you get more trials and feedback. And it'll be really interesting to see how that pilot goes.
We are very excited. And who doesn't want to watch live sports? It's a great time. I love that we get to do this for our work. We get to support people in their viewership of these awesome and exciting cultural events.
And it's such a unifying experience to be in an arena, in a stadium, surrounded by people who are rooting for the same team as you. So it's amazing that you're able to really make sure that those types of experiences are fully accessible to everyone who wants to engage in them. I did want to ask, so how do you kind of envision OneCourt's technology expanding to other sports and entertainment events in the future? I know you talked a little bit about the pilot that you're going to be doing later this year, but what's kind of your hope for extending this out a little bit further?
I think there's partly my hope, and there's a lot of different perspectives within our team and in the community as to where this technology can go. And I would say it's a little bit too early to tell exactly where it'll happen, but I always say, to our team, we have to earn the right to do it. Like, let's solve this problem first, and then we'll explore other things. But some of those initial exciting opportunities, I think, revolve around expansion to other types of entertainment, not just live sports, but what about sports gaming? What about other types of games where spatial information is relevant? And animation and movies and lots of different entertainment. I think there's a lot of potential there. But of course, it revolves around not only data, but also curated experiences. I would love to see, for example, a tactile interpretation of the latest Mission Impossible movie or something. Like, I think that could be a really interesting and compelling use case. On top of that, throughout our work, we've observed ample opportunity to continue innovating within the sports setting for people with disabilities, not just those with visual disabilities, but others in the community have told us, look, this is also a problem for me, whether that's captioning access at stadiums or, access to content in sensory rooms. I think there's a lot of opportunity within sports that we're sort of just scratching the surface. But of course, in accessibility, I think the saying is true, design for one, extend to many. And I think over time, we will learn many different use cases for this technology. And my hope is that the users are essentially defining that. I think people will take this tool and apply it where they see fit.
Actually, as I was listening to you describe the different parts of the technology, I did jump to like the sensory room scenario. I was like, oh my goodness, there are so many people who benefit from those kind of sectioned off sensory spaces to decompress from the overstimulating aspects of live sports, but then they could still engage in a tactile way with the sports, even though they might have removed themselves from the situation temporarily.
I think there's ample opportunity, again, with this really cool trend in sports, like the personalization of broadcasts. Like, you should be able to define your own experience, whether that's camera angles for sighted people or tactile broadcast for those that are interested. There's so many ways that we can go there.
And my last question for you is really just if our listeners are interested and want to either learn more about your different piloting initiatives or find out where OneCourt will be in terms of conferences, how could they go about learning more?
I think the best way is just to submit a form on our website. So our website is OneCourt.io. There's a form at the bottom of the homepage where you can submit basically anything you'd like, whether you're a community member looking to try the device and interested in that experience, whether you're a potential investor, please reach out. Or sports team, of course. If you're out and you're looking for an accommodation in your stadium or arena, let us know. We are always looking for ways to just deepen our relationship with these different communities. Reach out on our website. I'd say that's probably the best way. Or LinkedIn, we're pretty active there. You can follow us on LinkedIn. Just OneCourt.
Perfect. I will link both of those in our show notes for everybody listening. But I want to thank you so much, Jerred, for talking to us today about OneCourt and all of the awesome work being done. I'm also going to link some of the videos in the show notes too, just because I think I know you can't feel it, but you could at least see how it's done, which I think is helpful. But I want to thank you so much for being here with us today and just all of the great work you're doing with OneCourt. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks so much for having me. That was a real pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.